Good evening and welcome to this digitally enabled meeting of the Council of the Municipality of North Perth, held on Monday, October 18th, 2021. I'm Mayor Todd Kasenberg and I'll call this meeting to order. I ask the Deputy Clerk to note our starting time for the minutes as 7 p.m. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe peoples. We wish to recognize the long history of Indigenous peoples in Canada and show our respect to them today. We recognize their stewardship of the land. May we all live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship. Tonight's meeting is being streamed live on the Municipality of North Perth YouTube channel and will be available there after the meeting as an archived video. Anyone who is invited to speak will be recorded and their voice, image, and comments will form part of the live stream. The chair and or the clerk have the discretion and authority at any time to direct the termination or interruption of live streaming. Such direction will only be given in exceptional circumstances where deemed relevant. Circumstances may include instances where the content debate is considered misleading, defamatory, or potentially inappropriate to be published. Thank you. Welcome to those who are joining us via the YouTube channel. Welcome to councillors, staff, and delegations who will participate in this meeting tonight. At this time, I of course invite your decorum. We have no attendance regrets. All councillors are accounted for. So let us move on to item 2.1 of our agenda pertaining to pecuniary interest. For the benefit of those who are unfamiliar with our council practices, provincial legislation requires councillors with a potential pecuniary or financial interest in any item at the council table to declare this interest and to remove her or himself from discussions and voting on the item. In accordance with recommended protocol at this time, I invite all councillors with a perceived pecuniary interest, including those who have so declared in writing, to verbally advise the chair in public session, and if not already done, to submit documentation to this effect in writing to the clerk. Councillors are further reminded that should a potential conflict arise during the meeting, they may so declare and act at any point in the meeting, and again, follow up with the clerk. Let us begin this evening with Councillor Anstead, I believe. Welcome, Councillor Anstead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Kasenberg. Through you this evening, I'd like to declare a pecuniary interest on item 5.5.1, the accounts, specifically the daycare, as my son attends the St. Mary's daycare, and also on item 13.1, the confirmatory bylaw. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Anstead. Next up is Councillor Behrens. Welcome, Councillor Behrens.
Thank you, Mayor Kasenberg. Good evening, Council. Through you, Mayor Kasenberg, I will declare a conflict of interest for the agenda items 4.2, the Bearfelts Drain, 5.3.1, the North Perth Children's Services rates, 5.5.1, the accounts, and 13.1, the confirmatory. I have family members that own property on the Bearfelts Drain. As well, I have grandchildren attending the North Perth Spinrite Child and Family Center and programming. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Behrens. Councillor Anstead, I took note of 5.3.1 in Councillor Behrens' declaration. Did you want to declare on that one as well?
Yes, I did. My apologies, Mayor Kasenberg. Thank you.
Okay, so noted. Thank you. Next up, I believe, is Deputy Mayor Kellum.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. And through you, Mayor Kasenberg, I would like to declare pecuniary interest on items 5.3.1, 5.5.1, and also 13.1, the confirmatory bylaw. Regards with, I have a grandson that attends the daycare, and my mother and father-in-law are tenants at Perth Meadows. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Those are the ones I'm aware of ahead of time. Anyone else have a declaration at this point? We're not seeing any, so we're going to move forward. Let's explain our virtual processes. Tonight, I'll be trying to seek consent from various councillors as movers and seconders of the various resolutions and bylaws that are put before us. I will do this to some degree alphabetically. Should a councillor not wish to respond to the request, they may say so, and I'll move to the next name on the alphabetical list. Regarding speaking to our business, councillors tonight will identify themselves through our conferencing technologies chat function. The clerk is assisting me in tonight in maintaining the speaking order from that source. Councillors are allowed on their turn to deliver a primary question and one supplemental without intervention from me. We'll follow the speaking order relatively carefully, and any councillor wishing to have a second say after their primary and supplemental will have to indicate again and return to the bottom of the list. This is a normal process consistent with Robert's Rules of Order. All those who participate in tonight's meeting are reminded that if you're not audible, I'll let you know. You don't have to ask. If you can be heard, I'll let you know. Councillors are further asked to maintain a mute state in the web conference until I have called upon you for a verbal reaction. Should any of your votes not show up in eScribe, our voting technology, I will call on councillors when things seem stalled to register a manual vote. At that time, take yourself off mute, answer yes or no on the motion, then return to mute. Let's turn then to item 2.2 on our agenda. I have a motion for the adoption of the agenda for tonight's meeting that reads very simply as follows, that the agenda for tonight's meeting be approved. Why don't we start with Deputy Mayor Kellum? Will you serve as our mover for that?
Yes, I'll make that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston, will you serve as our seconder? And welcome, by the way.
I certainly would second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate on that? Seeing none, let's have that vote.
I'm in favor. My vote's not popping up. Councillor Andreessen, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Andreessen. We're missing one.
And the same with me. My vote is not popping up. Thank you, but I agree.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Thank you. So with those two manual votes, that's carried. Thank you. That brings us to item 3 on our agenda, the so-called consent agenda. These items are placed on our agenda because they're believed to be non-contentious, yet they warrant council's recognition and or action. Grouping them expedites our business. However, any councillor wishing to extract an item from the consent agenda for discussion, debate, or further action may do so. This is a busy one. There are 13 items on tonight's consent agenda, including the minutes of our last regular council meeting. Councillors, do any of you have a desire to extract any of these items for further discussion or action? Councillor Rothwell? Welcome, Councillor Rothwell.
Thank you, Mayor Todd, and good evening. My question is related to item number 5.2.2 of our minutes of our last council meeting, and I just wanted to ask the question of our councillors, county councillors, I should say.
Okay, so that is item 3.1, but it relates to the last meeting minutes.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have extraction they'd like to make? Okay, I think with council's leave, Councillor Rothwell, let's put it back to you, and we'll do what we can. So why don't you take the floor on this one?
Thank you very much, Mayor Todd. Again, this is the request for the extension of the draft plan approval for Lunor subdivision. And we had a good conversation about this at our last council meeting, and I understand certainly there was good conversation at county council in the decision to allow for the extension, but gave a range of 240 to 248 units, I believe. I'm not, my statement is this, is that when we talk about the importance of affordable housing and the need for increased density, our actions are required of our municipality and our decision makers to ensure that we are doing our best to ensure that we are getting as many affordable units as possible. And we may quibble about whether 8 units makes a big difference or not, but frankly, it does, in my opinion. And I would encourage the developer here in this case to reach that 248. And I think there's plenty of opportunity to do so. I'll just remind council, this council and the public, as well as the developer, it was the developer that came forward with this number of units as a possibility. We are not, quote, imposing this on the developer. And if when they submitted their plans, presumably they had full intention that they could reach that maximum number. So I'll encourage and support staff to have those conversations with the developer so that we can reach towards that maximum number, and as opposed to the lower 240, to ensure that we are getting the affordable housing units that we need in our community for our residents, both here now as well as those that will come. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Rothwell. I was absent from last week's County Council meeting, the cause of which was my son's wedding. I would be interested if Deputy Mayor Kellum or Councillor Duncan have any comments to make about the debates that occurred with regards to this matter there. I'd open the floor to either of you.
I can speak to this through you, Mayor Kasenberg. Excuse me, and thank you for your comments, Councillor Rothwell. And yes, it was quite a conversation at County Council, and it was made very clear that we wanted to impose to the 248, but some further discussion came about whether it was easements or whatever to make things flow forward. But I can give you, and Councillor Duncan can, can maybe speak to this as well, that to be assured that they are going to push to the full 248 as close as we can. But you had all of your North Perth Council representatives, Matt and myself there as well, the County Council, that were in support of this. So yes, your concerns were very well received, and we will go from here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anything further on that matter then, Councillor Rothwell?
No, thanks very much. I appreciate that, and we'll look forward to the work with the developer, and hopefully we'll get the maximum number. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Thanks. So I think now procedurally then we're probably primed to move this along. I have a resolution for our consideration for the consent agenda that reads as follows: that consent items 3.1 to 3.13 be received for information, and the minutes of the October 4th, 2021 regular council meeting be adopted. Councillor Richardson, can I call on you to be our mover?
Yes, I will move that.
Thank you. Councillor Rothwell, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate at this time? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you very much. So let's move forward then. Tonight, we are moving on to agenda item number 4. We have the opportunity to conduct 3 public meetings related to drain improvements. To facilitate those public meetings, we will temporarily adjourn from our regular council meeting, and I have before me a motion to make that happen. The motion reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth adjourns at 7:13 p.m. for the purpose of public meetings under the Drainage Act concerning the following: 1, the Bartman Drain Report; 2, the Burfeld's Drain Report; and 3, the Shearer Drain Report. Can I call on Councillor Seiler to be our mover for this?
Yes, I'll move it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Andreessen, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I'll make that. I'll second that motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any discussion or debate on this one? Let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. At this time then, Council, we are temporarily adjourned. This provides us with the opportunity for public meetings. Let's begin with the first one. I'm welcoming all to a consideration of the report for the Bartman Municipal Drain. This is a public meeting that allows the drainage report to be presented. If any landowners who are assessed are with us, I welcome you tonight and look forward to the opportunity for your comments. First, as our first order of business, we will hear about the drain report, a verbal report by Brandon Widener, who is an associate with Street Associates Limited. Sorry, my tongue is twisting here tonight. Brandon, welcome. The floor is yours.
So good evening, everybody. Tonight we have the Bartman Drain. The Bartman Drain was initiated under Section 4 and 78 of the Drainage Act. It's located just east of the, let's say, the village of Kurtzville. It's in the neighborhood of Road 171 and line 88. We had a number of requests on this drain. I believe the first request came from Brock Poultry Limited, which is operated by Paul Cargus. He noted some flooding in the area, and he looked at drain improvements. Much of these farms already have been systematically tiled by Williams Drainage locally. We had a landowner meeting, I would say in June 24th, I believe, and much of the watershed was there, and a number of requests further came forward to compromise on what we have tonight. So tonight we have a full replacement of the tile portion of the Bartman Drain. Now this was a drain that was constructed in 1962. There's very few details in the report that Scott provided us that was by James Howes, but there was an existing, I believe, a 12-inch tile drain in this location. We are proposing to upgrade it to a 30-inch at the bottom end, and it transitions in sizes as you get further up down to a 8-inch tile at the top end. The total cost of this project is estimated at $171,000. There is 3 road crossings involved. There's 2 under Road 171 and 1 under line 88. I guess we had discussed it with the owners as well as Perth County. The assessments are laid out in the report, and I have not received any, I guess, questions from the landowners since the report's been issued, but I'd be happy to answer any now.
Thank you, Mr. Widener. At this time, the clerk advises me that we don't believe we have any assessed landowners on this WebEx call with us. So that allows me to turn to council and ask council if there are any questions you have for Mr. Widener. Are we seeing anything, Pat? Okay. So we're not seeing any indication in our chat function about requests for the floor from council. It looks like, Mr. Widener, you get off fairly easily tonight on that one then, which means at this point that this public meeting for the Bartman Drain can be adjourned. I will note, following the public meeting, as our next order of business, we will consider the provisional bylaw, giving first and second reading, and we will also look to set the court revision date for the Bartman Municipal Drain. All right, I think that moves us along to our second drain for the night. This one is the Burfeld's Municipal Drain. Again, the same purpose. We're having a public meeting to receive information about the report that has been prepared by the engineering firm, the drainage report. If there are assessed landowners, and I'm not sure there are, Pat's shaking her head, then welcome to you. If you're watching on YouTube, very good. And again, Mr. Widener, you're up to present the report. Please have the floor.
So we also have the Burfeld's Drain tonight. Now this is located conveniently just west of the Bartman Drain. It was also initiated by Section 4 and 78, just outside the town of Kurtzville, and it was initiated by, I believe there was a severance completed, as well as a construction of a new truck repair facility. It's under M&K Holdings Limited. There was also some interest from Burns Metal Manufacturing to have some drain improvements, mainly on the front portion of their property. There is an existing drain here. It was constructed in 1969, and it consisted of 6 to 10-inch tile. And most of the project is located in the Heimers property, south of the road, and it outlets into what is called the Bartman Open Drain. So we also had a site meeting on June 24th, same as the other one. Many of the owners were there. And from that, we did learn that Barron's Manufacturing was interested in improved drainage for their parking lot, as well as some of the concerns by Mr. Heimers. So we have a full replacement of this drain as well as an extension. And there is a little bit of a realignment because the existing drain, I believe, ran to the back of what would be the M&K Holdings property. It's going to be a 12-inch or 300 millimeter tile on the south side of Perth line 88. There is a bore underneath line 88 assessed to Perth County, and then an 8-inch tile along. It's in the property of Lavalet Limited. It then enters M&K Holdings, and it is for the drainage of the new facility. And I believe their stormwater management facilities are located at the front of that property as well, so it should all tie in nicely. And as well, it is being adjacent to the other drain. It allows an opportunity to tender two projects adjacent to each other, which sometimes helps in better pricing. Total cost of this project is $112,000. That's with all the administration and the allowances. And the assessments are laid out in the report. You know, if I have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I will say that Mr. Scott Richardson has also appointed us on another drain adjacent both these called the Reed drain. And you should be seeing that drain as well before Christmas, as we were trying to make sure all these were tendered at similar times for better pricing. It's very convenient to have projects that are literally hundreds of meters apart for the contractor. Sometimes that allows for a much better price.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Widener. Appreciate that and appreciate your attention to the cost savings potential of tendering these stuff together. That's great. At this time, again, the clerk has indicated we don't have anyone attending as an assessed landowner. So that means I can turn to council. Council, do you have any questions about this report for Mr. Widener? We're not seeing any indication of that. So certainly, you know, this can move forward with council considering under agenda item 4.2 the provisional bylaw giving first and second reading, and also taking the opportunity to set a date for the court of revision. With that, we adjourn that matter. We turn our attention now to our third drain of the evening. Mr. Widener, thank you for your services tonight. And we turn our attention to the third drain opportunity. This one is the Shearer Municipal Drain. We're having a public meeting for the Shearer Municipal Drain. Again, our purpose is to receive the drainage report from the consultant engineer. And again, if there are any assessed landowners who are attending or on YouTube, I welcome you to the proceedings. For this one, we are inviting Mr. Ed DeLay from RJ Burnside and Associates to present the report. Mr. DeLay, welcome to our council meeting. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, council, for having me. Pat, maybe we could, I know you have a selection of drawings here. Maybe the overall plan would be, if you have that one, or this one would also work. Just so
Mr. DeLay, we're having a hard time hearing you. Your audio seems quite quiet.
It is quiet. Can you hear me now? Is that easier?
It's not much better.
Really? Okay. How about now? Is that better? I guess you can just keep letting me know. Is that okay, or is that quite quiet still?
It's fairly quiet, but I think obviously we're encountering the technical limitations that come from time to time. So I suggest that you proceed, and we'll put on our best listening ears.
All right, I'll try to speak up for you, but please let me know if it's too much. So what was I going to say? Let's get started. I'll give a brief outline, and then we can. I would be happy to entertain any questions. So the location. This is the Shearer Drain, and it's on the east edge of Listowel. It's just east of Tremaine Ave, and the watershed extends just north of line 86 and down to the south to line 84. Okay. We were appointed 3 appointments. The initial appointment by the Haverkamp property was for a drain realignment. So under section 78 for an improvement. Additionally, there were 2 appointments under Section 4 for new drains, and they're both pipe drains, and I'll get into those in a second. Those are the Havercamp and the Carson branches. So a little background here, the shear drain, the main drain was originally established in 1920, and there were further reports in 1963 and 2016 on the closed sections. The total contributing area for this project is about just under 1,000 acres, 400 hectares. The realignment on the Havercamp property, which you can see here, is for a new barn, mainly a barn extension, which would require the, as you can see here, the existing channel, which is shown in gray, kind of dissects the property. It would split on a 90-degree angle and head over to the east of the property line. The 2 additional pipe drains are to service an upstream watershed, which we'll talk about in a second here. This project's been going on for quite some time. We were originally appointed in 2014, and it has had several permutations. Over the course of that, we've had an on-site meeting for each of the appointments and 2 information meetings. Those are in 2016 and 2017, in addition to a large number of landowner meetings and project scoping meetings, as this has changed several times. During which time there's been several major modifications to the design and the scope based on landowner input and construction, which has happened before the report was completed. There's also been some additional, we'll call it consultation with some of the property owners who were not as familiar with the Drainage Act. And there's a diversity of land uses within the watershed, so that has also been a major factor. So our proposed design is split up into 3 parts. The main drain, which is shown on the plan in front of you here, that's a channel, and the majority of it will be a deepening and widening, about 1.5 kilometers in length. Within the middle of this, we have just over 350 meters of channel realignment. Within that, there's also 7 sediment basins, riffle structures, and riparian buffer strips along that entire length. The Havercamp branch, which services concession 1, it is a previously constructed tile that we're incorporating, and it's just over 400 meters of 21-inch concrete tile and 1 catch basin. Construction as part of this would add an additional culvert, an additional subsurface crossing for the existing former railway, and that would be to access the Killam property and the Lenore property to the north. In order to deal with the flooding in that area, there's also a surface water inlet and buried surface water, essentially a French drain in that area where we'll encourage flooding for the time being in an unused area, and this will help mitigate impacts on the drainage system and the downstream property, the Havercamp property. Thirdly, the Carson branch, we're incorporating just under 100 meters of 12-inch plastic tile, and this is mainly for an outlet for the Carson property to the northeast, sorry. And finally, costs. In total, this project, we have estimated the cost at $502,000, construction being just over $175,000 of that. Allowances, because we're incorporating the existing drainage system in some cases, are estimated at $132,000. Engineering is higher than normal at $157,000, and sundries and other project costs, so these include camera tile work, soil investigations, net HST interest, and a contingency as well, is just over $35,000. So I'd be happy to take any questions now, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. DeLay. First, I believe we do have at least one homeowner or property owner on this train who is with us. So the opportunity for that landowner to ask questions at this point is available. If you want to identify yourself, if you have a question, if you don't have a question, we will proceed to let council have its turn. Okay, so at this point, I'm not seeing an indication from the landowner who's assessed on this. So let's turn to council. Council, do you have any questions about this? Are we seeing anything? No, we're not seeing anything. All right. So at this point in time, then the meeting can come to a close. It can be adjourned. But as well, we do take note that following this public meeting, council will consider a provisional bylaw for first and second reading on these remedies, and also will set a court of revision date. And with that, I think we bring our three meetings around drainage reports to a close. I have a motion, therefore, council, to close out our public meeting and reconvene. It reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth hereby close the public meeting to consider drain reports, and that council reconvene into regular open council. Can I call on Councillor Anstett to be our mover for this one?
Yes, I would move that. Thank you.
Thanks. And Councillor Behrens, I think you're safe here. Can I call on you to be the seconder?
Yes, I will second that motion.
Thanks. All right. Any discussion or debate on that, council? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you very much, Mr. DeLay. Thank you for joining us tonight and for your services on this project. Let's carry out business then. We are reconvened as regular council at this point. Let me fold up some of the papers on my desk here. It's starting to be a little messy. I'm not sure what I would say. Let's turn our attention to some of the resolutions that fall out from those public meetings. So we're turning to item 4.1 on the agenda. I have three different resolutions, one of which is a bylaw, a provisional bylaw. So let's go through them one by one. The first reads that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth will accept the Bartman Municipal Drain Report dated September 14th, 2021, prepared by Street Associates Engineering and Architects. Can I call on Councillor Duncan to be our mover for that one?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor Kellum, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I'll second that motion. Thank you.
Thanks. Any discussion or debate on this one? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that's carried. Next up, a resolution that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth will hold the Court of Revision for the Bartman Municipal Drain on November 8th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. Can I call on Councillor Johnston to be our mover for that?
Yes, I would move that.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson, will you serve as our seconder?
I'll second that. Thank you.
Thanks. Any discussion or debate on that one? Seeing none, let's have that vote. That's carried. And next up is the bylaw resolution that reads as follows: that bylaw number 105-2021, being a bylaw to provide for a drainage works Bartman Municipal Drain, be introduced and read and considered read a first and second time, and be provisionally adopted, and that the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Councillor Rothwell, can I call on you to be the mover for that?
Yes, I so move.
Councillor Seiler, will you serve as our seconder?
I will second it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate on that? Let's have that vote. That is carried. Thank you. That moves us along to item 4.2. Again, three pieces here, Council. First, that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth will accept the Burfeld's Municipal Drain Report dated September 16th, 2021, prepared by Spreet Associates Engineering and Architects. Can I call on Councillor Andreessen to be our mover for this one?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Anstett, will you second that?
Yes, I would second that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Not seeing any, so let's have that vote. That is carried. Next up is the resolution about the Court of Revision. Reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth will hold the Court of Revision for the Perthvelds Municipal Drain on November 8th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. Can I call on Councillor Duncan to be our mover for that one?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor Callan, will you serve as our seconder?
Yes, I'll second that motion. Thank you.
Thanks. Any discussion or debate on that one? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. And next up is the bylaw here, bylaw number 106-2021, being a bylaw to provide for a drainage works, Fairfields Municipal Drain, be introduced, read, and considered read a first and second time, and be provisionally adopted, and that the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Councillor Johnston, will you serve as our mover for that?
Yes, I would certainly move that.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson, will you be our seconder?
I'll second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And my e-scrap is the one that's frozen at this point. So I vote in favor. And with that, I believe it is carried. Thank you. We just reload the meeting here in e-scribe, see whether we have a problem. It's always helpful when it works for me. All right, now we turn to the third drain. Verse 3. All right, we have 3 resolutions here, Council, as well. The first, that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth will accept the Shearer Municipal Drain Report dated August 31st, 2021, prepared by R.J. Burnside and Associates Limited. Can I call on Councillor Behrens to serve as our mover on this one?
Yes, I will make that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Rothwell, will you be the seconder for this one?
I'll second it. Yes.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote.
I'm in favor. My vote didn't come up. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Anstett. So with that vote, that's carried. Let's turn to the Court of Revision resolution that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth will hold the Court of Revision for the Shearer Municipal Drain on November 8th, 2021 at 6:15 p.m. Can I call on Councillor Seiler to be our mover for this one?
Yes, I'll move that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Andreessen, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I'll second that motion. Thank you.
Thanks. Your audio just chopped out a little bit there, Leanne. All right, any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. And next, the bylaw, provisional bylaw. Bylaw number 107-2021. Being a bylaw to provide for drainage works, Shearer Municipal Drain, be introduced, read, and considered read a first and second time. Ooh, rushing it. And be provisionally adopted, and that the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and be sealed with the seal of the corporation. Can I call on Councillor Anstett to be our mover for this one?
Yes, I would move that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Behrens, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I will second that motion.
Thanks. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote.
I'm in favor. My vote didn't come up again. I'll have to reset it. Thank you.
Thanks. So with Councillor Ansted's vote, that's carried. And that allows us to move forward to our next item, which is under agenda item number 4.2, 4.4, sorry, 4.4, myself. All right, let's have a look at that one tonight. We have one delegation scheduled for a meeting, one that is quite anticipated, I suspect. It is my pleasure to welcome Julia Salvini, the principal of Salvini Consulting, who will be presenting an update on the Maine Wallace traffic pilot project. I believe she's accompanied by Mr. Potter from our engineering firm, but Ms. Salvini is in the driver's seat, oh, bad pun, and we welcome you at this time. Ms. Salvini.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
We can.
Super. Thanks very much. Well, I'm delighted to be here to give you an update tonight on the pilot project that is ongoing at the intersection of Maine and Wallace in downtown Listowel. And yes, I'm here with Bruce Potter, and also Lyndon Couch is here from your engineering department. Pat, you've got the controls there, so could you advance to the next slide? Tonight, we're just going to be reviewing the pilot project and what's been happening, and we'll be giving you an overview of the information that we're hearing back, both from our data, but also from the stakeholders that we've been speaking to. As many of you are aware, and many of you were actually there, we held a Public Information Center 2 weeks ago on October 4th, and we'll be providing some conclusions and recommendations as well. Next slide, please. As a brief reminder, and I'm sure you don't really need reminding, but the reason that we went ahead with the pilot project was to deal with ongoing congestion in the downtown area of Listowel. And you're seeing it even throughout the pandemic that the congestion continued before and during the pilot project. And the main issue that we were trying to address through the project was the high volume of truck traffic and the queuing from the intersection at Maine and Wallace, which when we get back from the intersection begins to interfere with the way that people access driveways and neighboring intersections and parking spaces on the street and so on. Previous council had considered some other options for the intersection, but there were concerns about them. They involved removing a lot of parking in the downtown and also putting in turning restrictions, along with considering the pairing of Inkerman and Elma as a one-way pair of streets. Those options were considered problematic by council, but some other longer-term options are continuing to be considered as part of the municipality's transportation master plan. And those long-term options include a truck bypass of the downtown, and also the acquisition of property at the corners so that the intersection can be properly aligned. Back in September of 2019, we were here giving a presentation to council to talk about this pilot project and what we hope to achieve. And council gave us direction at that time to go ahead. In, I would say, about the 6 months that followed that council meeting, we met with a number of stakeholders to discuss the pilot project and how we wanted to proceed with it. They helped us to tweak the design in the way that you see it now on the street. So if we can move to the next slide, please, Pat. You see on the screen here, and I'll stay here for a moment, just a reminder of what's been done at the intersection. So we start with the main change has been the conversion of Wallace South, the south leg of the intersection, into one-way southbound. So we have no more northbound traffic at the intersection. However, we've maintained an emergency access lane for fire trucks so that when there's an emergency and they need to travel through the intersection to the north, that's available to them. We have restricted the left turns in the westbound direction. So coming from the east, there's a no left turn restriction there. We have moved up the stop bar in that direction as well as a result of that. And we've included an eastbound right turn restriction just for trucks because that turn is very difficult to navigate for trucks. There really isn't enough room for them. We have moved the southbound stop bar for the left turning and through vehicles, so southbound Wallace. We've moved that back to create additional space for trucks turning, in particular from the west. So making that left turn from the west and the right turn from the east, so that there's a little bit more space for them to navigate. And we have also removed the east leg pedestrian crossing, which is sort of where the westbound stop bar is now. So those are a number of changes that have happened at the intersection. What we've done that you see at the bottom of that page as well is introduced an all-way stop at the intersection of Wallace and Alma Streets. So if we go to the next slide, it's just in words what I've just described on this page. I wanted to point out that on the next slide, we've removed some on-street parking in the area. Some of that parking likely should be removed whether or not the pilot had been done or whether or not the pilot remains in place. In particular, the 2 parking spaces just to the west of the entrance, all the parking spaces that have been removed are on the south side of the street. There were 2 just to the west of the intersection. And in removing those parking spaces, they provide a great deal more flexibility for traffic in the eastbound direction to navigate around one another. Now, one of those spaces was an accessible parking space, and it was actually shifted further down the street. It was removed in that location, but it was replaced elsewhere a little bit further to the west. There were also 5 parking spaces east of the intersection, which were removed. And we believe that some of those spaces, probably 3 of them, could be replaced since putting the pilot in place and watching the traffic through that area and testing the trucks, we think that there's enough maneuvering space that we could replace some of those parking spaces as well. Next slide, please. So in order to understand how the parking or how the pilot was working, we had already collected some traffic count data at the intersection back in 2018. We collected it in May to get sort of typical during the year traffic volumes, but then again in August on a Friday to get that summer weekend traffic data as well. So we went back after the pilot was put in place and we collected that same traffic count data at the intersection. And what we found is that over the 6 hours that cover sort of the morning peak period 7 to 10 a.m. and the afternoon peak period 3 to 6 p.m. there's a similar amount of traffic traveling through the intersection in 2021 as there was in 2018. When we look at the peak hour volumes, what we find is that, so that's the busiest hour in the morning and the busiest hour in the afternoon. What we find is that the volume through the intersection during the hour is about the same. But because we remove traffic coming from the south, what we find is that the traffic volumes on the other 3 approaches has gone up by about 10 to 15%. And for those of you who were either at the meeting that we had with the public on October the 4th or have had the opportunity to sort of watch the recording from that, at that time, we had just gotten the traffic data back and quickly done some calculations. And I had said that the traffic volumes had gone up, but that was not the case. And I've confirmed and rechecked my numbers. The traffic volumes are about the same in the peak hours now as they were back in 2018. The truck percentages are also still high. They're about the same as they were back in 2018. So if we go to the next slide, we can see in a little bit more detail what those traffic volumes look like. So here we're looking at the morning peak hours, so the busiest hour in the weekday morning, a comparison of the 2018 data in May and August, and then the September 2021 data. And we can see that there's about 100 trips in that hour going through in 2018 from Wallace Street South to Wallace Street North. And if we look at how the traffic volumes have changed in other parts of the intersection in 2021, we can see that in the westbound direction on the right turn, we've seen an increase of sort of 40 to 50 vehicle trips in that hour. And in the eastbound left turn direction, we've seen an increase of about 40 trips. So we're seeing those 100 trips, most of them get redistributed in the morning peak hour to other parts of the intersection. We've seen some small changes on the other movements, but they're relatively similar, which is sort of interesting because we often get asked if traffic flows are back to normal. are they back to pre-COVID levels? And it's helpful to see data like this that shows us the traffic really is returning to what we call pre-COVID levels now. So if we can go to the next slide, we can look at the same information for the PM peak hour, and it's a little bit different. So in the PM peak hour, we saw traffic volumes in the northbound through direction coming from Wallace Street South of about 120 to 150 trips in the PM peak hour. When we look at how the westbound right turn and eastbound left turn movements have changed. So instead of going northbound through, we see traffic coming from the sides and coming up from Main Street. We can see that those volumes have increased probably 20 to 50 vehicles in the peak hour. So we're starting to capture some of that traffic. But what that tells us is that some of that traffic is going elsewhere. And we'll see that in some of the other data that we've looked at in the slides that follow. The other thing that's interesting to see in this traffic data, although it was relatively similar in the two counts in 2018, we can see that the southbound traffic has increased in the PM peak hour generally, and also that the westbound through traffic has increased. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So one of the other things that we did is we counted turning movements at the Main Street intersections with Livingston, Wellington, and Davidson before. So this year in 2021, in early August, we counted them before the pilot went in, and then we did it again after it went in to see how those turning movements were changing. And just skipping over the first bullet point, what we found is that Livingston is carrying about 40 to 50 more peak hour trips northbound in both peak hours. Wellington is carrying about 40 more trips. Davidson is carrying about 10 to 15 more trips. So you'll recall that in the morning peak hour, we were seeing about 100 trips going through from the south before the pilot. In the afternoon peak hour, we're seeing about 150 trips. So what that tells us is that the majority of that traffic is dispersing itself within a short distance, like Livingston, the first intersection to the west, Wellington and Davidson, the first two intersections to the east, capture most of the traffic. But it does tell us that the traffic is going elsewhere as well. And that's what we thought was going to happen. We were often asked during this pilot why we didn't tell people where to go, tell them which route to take. And part of the reason was that because there are so many different routes available for traffic to go from the south end of town to the north end of town, we didn't want to give them one route and send them all the same way and cause 100 trips or 150 trips to go one way. We wanted to test the opportunity for traffic to disperse elsewhere in the network. So that is happening as we expected. And when we we did a traffic count at Wallace and Elma during the pilot project, and it tells us that the traffic it's relatively evenly split. About 58% of the traffic is coming north and making a left turn. About 42% is coming north and making a right turn. Next slide, please. The other piece of information we collected as part of this project, because queuing was such a big part of the congestion in the downtown, we collected information about how traffic was queuing at the intersection, again, in August of 2021 before the pilot went in, and in August of 2021 after the pilot went in. And the purpose of the survey was to measure in this case, we looked at 3 different time periods. We looked at between 8 and 10 a.m. in the morning. We looked at between 11 and 1 in the midday, and between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. And we measured how long the queue was every time the light turned red in all 4 directions. And what we found is that there was, as you all know, there's significant queuing caused by coming back from that intersection. And what we found is that those queues decreased from 15 to 60%. So in the next slide, we look at the maximum queues. And what that represents is you can see for each of the 3 legs of the intersections that continue to operate approaching Maine and Wallace, you can see how the queues have changed. And that's the longest queue during that time frame. So the longest queue on Main Street eastbound in the morning peak hour was 213 meters before the pilot. After the pilot was put in place, it dropped to 153 meters. So we can see that the queues, the maximum queues, are decreasing on every approach in every peak hour, which we were hoping and expecting would happen. And it's a varying amount between sort of 15% and 60%. So that's the maximum queue reduction. When we go to the next slide, we see the cumulative queues. So this is when we measured the queues over the 2-hour period and we add them all together, that's the number we got. So on Main Street West, between 8 and 10 a.m., before the pilot was put in place, when we measured all those queues over 2 hours, they measured 4.7 kilometers. When we did it again after the pilot was put in place, it dropped to 3.6 kilometers, and we saw a change of 23%. So that's the data that you're seeing before you here. It's a measure more of the experience over the entire peak period, as opposed to if you get stuck in the longest queue. So we're seeing reductions in all of those queues, some of them more significant than others, over the course of the pilot in all 3 directions. We'll go to the next slide, please, Pat. We collected a lot of feedback during the pilot project. Many people took the opportunity to write and to share their thoughts with a number of different staff members, and we collected all of that. There were 2 surveys undertaken, one to the general public, and there was a specific survey for businesses as well. And we got some very useful feedback. It was great. There was some positive feedback about how well the intersection is operating. A lot of people liked the changes that have been implemented through the pilot. We had lots of concerns raised, and I'll review those in the next slide. The feedback was weighted very much to people who use the intersection in the northbound and southbound direction, and we've pulled some of the data from the surveys that I'll share in a few slides. The police have commented that they're fully supportive of the pilot project, and the fire department also has used the fire lane on a number of occasions. They find that it's working well for them. If we go to the next slide, highlights in no particular order a number of the concerns that have been raised over the course of the pilot through the many different channels where we're hearing feedback from folks. Some of the things that have been raised could potentially be addressed. For example, people are finding that the crossing time for pedestrians is very long. So when we removed the northbound lane from the intersection, or the ability to travel north through the intersection, we took the time that previously had been allocated for that movement, and we shared it between the other 3 legs of the intersection. And so they got longer. There was more time for the southbound approach. There was more time for the east and west approaches. But what that means for pedestrians is if you're crossing more than 1 leg, there's extra time to cross. So you cross 1 leg and now you have to wait because there's extra time to cross. And so one of the complaints or one of the concerns that we've heard is if you're crossing multiple legs of the intersection, in particular, if you're crossing from the southeast corner to the northeast corner and you can't cross directly, now you're finding it takes a long time to cross all 3 legs of the intersection. So some of those concerns we think that we can address. There are ways of tweaking the signal timing so that we have more cycles of light. Percentage-wise, you would still get lots of time for the southbound and for the east-west approaches, but you would shorten the cycle length so pedestrians were given just the right amount of time to cross. So if you cross in one direction, then you're ready to cross in the next direction relatively soon. Some of the comments were questions. There were questions about whether or not there was going to be damage to the fire trucks from driving over the bollards, which we understand is not the case. There were comments about illegal parking, which to a certain extent don't have anything to do. It's an ongoing problem in the downtown, but doesn't really particularly relate to the pilot itself. But the majority of the comments that are related directly to the pilot itself was around delays for traffic from Wallace South getting to the north end of town, and in particular, delays accessing Main Street. So can we go to the next slide, please? Wanted to give you some information about the survey. So this is the general survey that was put out to the public, and many business owners also provided information as part of this survey. There were 297 responses, which is fantastic, really great response. Many who use the intersection every day. I'll show you some of the stats shortly, but we know that northbound traffic represents from the traffic counts about 14% of the traffic through the intersection. And yet 33% of the people who answered the survey identified that they primarily use the intersection in the northbound direction. So we know that there's a high representation of people responding to the survey who live in the south end or travel from the south end to the north end and are impacted by the delays that are incurred through the pilot project. There were 27% who said the intersection operates better, 59% said the intersection operates worse for them, and 69% of the people who responded said their commute time has increased. Of those 69%, 11 said the increase was 1 to 2 minutes, 56% said 2 to 5 minutes, and 32% said it was more than 5 minutes. So if we go to the next slide, you can see in a little bit more detail, and I'll trust that those of you who had access to the package in advance perhaps read these questions, but the two questions that are put on this slide are about the direction of travel. So on the left, what direction do you typically travel through the intersection? All that apply. So there's more than 300 responses on this slide, but 33% of them said in the northbound direction. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that that's only 14% of the traffic. So good response from folks living in the south end. And the second graphic is about during the trial, have you noticed the intersection to function the same, better, or worse when driving through it compared to function before the trial? So we see that, having to step back a bit so I can see it myself, in the green, we said it is the response that said it was the same, in the yellow, that it was better, and in the purple, that it was worse. So that was the 29%, and I believe it was 27 and 57% that said it was better and worse in the yellow and the purple. Next slide, please. On this slide, we're seeing the impact of the commute time. So the question 5 was, how has the trial impacted your commute time? And we see increase in green, decrease in yellow, no change in purple. And then if we take the folks who said in green that there was increased, and we break them down into 1 to 2 minutes, which is the green, 2 to 5 minutes, which is the yellow, and more than 5 minutes, which is the purple. We go to the next slide. So that was the survey that was done generally. There was a business survey as well, and the information for the survey was given out in person, door to door, to over 60 businesses in the core. We received only 7 responses from the businesses. They were all located in the core. You can see where they were. And there was a concern raised about the loss of parking, and in particular, the accessible space, which I mentioned, was moved. And I think there was some delay between when it was removed and when the paint went down for the accessible space and it was identified as an accessible space. So there perhaps could have been some confusion there as well. Overwhelmingly, what we heard, and not just in the business survey results, but also through the general survey, was how much people like the always stop at Wallace and Elma. And there was a couple of different reasons raised, which I thought were important. One is that it does a better job of assigning the right of way of vehicle traffic at the intersection. And the second one was a number of people who walk through that intersection pointed out that having a stop on Wallace Street makes it safer for pedestrians to cross, in particular on the north side. So we had a number of comments about that as part of the survey results. But there was still a number of people who commented on their concern about trucks in the core. So if we go to the next slide, we can see a couple of different things from the business survey. Have you noticed an impact on traffic that affects your business and or your patrons? 2 people said yes, the rest said no. We asked questions about parking, and has loss of parking affected your business? 1 person said yes, the rest said no. It was a small sample size, but it gives you a good sense of the types of comments that the business community are providing as part of this process. In the next slide, we talk about the PIC that was held for this 2 weeks ago. As I mentioned, some of you were there, but there were 4 delegates, 2 that came from the same household. And generally speaking, we had 1 delegate who spoke in support, a second one who also spoke in support, but identified himself as an initial doubter. who lives on Elma Street and said he was very concerned about the pilot when it started, but he's been pleasantly surprised with how well it works. The third delegation was a couple, and they both spoke, who live on Wellington, and primarily their concern was about delays getting from the south to the north. And in particular, they mentioned that when they are traveling northbound on Wellington, trying to turn right onto Main Street, they can be significantly delayed behind anybody who wants to turn left, because it's very hard to make a left turn from Wellington onto Main Street because it's so close to the Wallace intersection. So going to the next slide and taking all that information together, I think in conclusion, we would say the pilot was successful in doing what we hoped that it would do, in making the intersection work better. It definitely reduced the queues, and generally the intersection is working better for cars traveling through it. But there are impacts, and in particular, we heard a lot about the delays for people traveling from the south end of town to the north end of town, and for the pedestrians crossing the intersection. We felt, given the feedback that we heard from the many people who provided feedback, and then also from our own observations at the intersection, that there's some changes that should be kept, whether the pilot stays or not. The always stop at Wallace and Elma is working very well, and it's providing a right-of-way direction that probably is needed at that intersection. So we feel that that should stay, but it needs a permanent installation. So the signs need to be made permanent. We need proper marking of crosswalks, and we need proper accessible corners in that location. The setback of the stop bar in the southbound direction at the Maine Wallace intersection also works very well. It provides additional space, in particular for large trucks, to turn onto Wallace Street North, and should stay. And then the parking, the two parking spaces that I was talking about previously that are west of the intersection on the south side of Main Street, should continue to stay removed, because they provide the opportunity for traffic to navigate in the eastbound direction far better than the previous configuration. Finally, we move to the recommendations. And what you'll find is that we're not making a recommendation with respect to what council should do with the intersection, but we do want to make recommendations depending on what council chooses. So first and foremost, it's very important that we continue to pursue the longer term solutions. The truck bypass of the downtown, property acquisition for proper realigning of the intersection. These things don't happen quickly and easily. They happen when you put policy in place to support them and develop them over time. And so we should be continuing to do that through the Transportation Master Plan process. And you will be hearing more about that in the weeks and months to come. And we are hearing that those types of solutions are sort of in the 5+ year range. They take that long to get put in place. If the pilot becomes permanent, we think that there are opportunities to adjust signal timing and to continue to tweak the intersection to make it work better. There's maybe the opportunity to look at some operational changes at intersections like Maine and Wellington in particular, perhaps to implement a turning restriction. We can look at the long delays for left turning traffic. There's also the option to continue the pilot as a pilot if council feels that they want to continue to receive feedback and continue to watch and listen. The pilot could continue as a pilot. And then the last option is to take it out. But if council chooses to take out the pilot project, as I said, it's going to be about 5 years or more before these other measures, these longer term measures, can be put in place to relieve some of the congestion. And I would just remind council at this time, you know, we heard back a lot from the people who were inconvenienced by the pilot project, who found that it was very difficult to travel from the south end of town to the north. We did hear a number of people giving positive feedback for the pilot project who like it. If you take it out, you're going to hear more from those people, because I suspect there's a lot of people who are also enjoying the convenience and the better operations of the intersection who we haven't heard from. So this is the end of my presentation. And you know, I welcome any questions. We've put a lot of data in front of you. There's been a lot of discussion around this. If I can help answer any questions that you may continue to have, I'd be happy to do it. And my colleagues, of course, Bruce Potter and Lyndon Couch are here as well to answer questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Salvini. An excellent report. I think this council is grateful for all the work that has been done. I note again that this has been a grand experiment, and so we've learned a lot and collected a lot of data to help us understand impacts of some of this. I think among the challenges that you've identified are that there's sort of a multivariate problem here, that you know, there are a lot of things that we changed all at once, and teasing out which ones had the biggest bang, if that's even valuable, is certainly of interest, and perhaps complexity in terms of trying to decide how to proceed. At this time, I think I'd entertain questions. Let's get to questions, folks, if we can at this point, and let's go with Councillor Seilers first.
Thank you, Mayor Todd, and thank you, Julia, for your report. I guess one of my questions is the two traffic spots you took out on the west on Maine. One was a handicap spot, and would it be possible to move it back up to the front where it was? Because one of the reasons why I'm asking is that there is a jewelry store there, and they have emergency cutoffs sometimes. And sometimes when one Saturday morning I was down there, and they were having one of these emergency cutoffs, and the person couldn't get out of their car, so they did it on the street. So something like that, he says he might only use it once or twice a year, but it's well worth it to be there for him if it should have to happen. So, and I'm glad to hear you say that we can add the 3 parking spots back on the east side. But that was one of my questions and concerns, if we could bring that handicap back closer to where it was. Thank you.
Ms. Salvini, did you want to offer comment?
It's not a good virtual meeting until somebody starts talking with their mute button on, right? I was just going to say, I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that question. I think my answer would be we can certainly look into it, but it could be that Bruce or Lyndon is better equipped to answer. And I think if I understand your question correctly, it's not, can we put it back, but could we make it the first, like we moved it several spaces back? You're asking, could we make the first space the accessible space?
Yes, the way it was in the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah, Bruce or Lyndon, do you want to jump in?
I guess if Lyndon's not going to be speaking and he's shy tonight, taking those 2 spots out that we did, the next one, the third one, could be operationally considered to be the handicapped or accessible spot. And depending how it's painted, it might, you know, push the others down a half a spot. But I see no reason not to do that. And you would just have to see how it fit in. I don't think it certainly doesn't matter to Julia or I where that accessible parking spot is along those streets. And I think it's a function of the community deciding where the best spot for it is.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Andreessen.
Hi, thank you through you, Mayor Kasenberg, and I really appreciated the data, Julia. I think it's important that we use this data to make good decisions, and it's good to have that. I appreciate it. My question around this is, we would anticipate that the strings of traffic leaving the municipality going towards Elmira would be closer together, I think. And so in anticipation of that, well, I guess would that happen, I guess, because the lights are changing faster, so to speak. So the strings would be closer together. And one of the reports from residents to me is that it's causing some issues for some companies on Highway 86 for truck traffic to pull onto 86 because the strings of traffic are too close. So I just wondered if those lights would, like the faster light change would cause that. I hope that you understand my question. Thanks.
I do. I think I understand. It has to do with the sort of, we call it a platoon of vehicles. When the light turns green, a big bunch of cars go and trucks go. And if that happens frequently, there's fewer gaps. But I think what ends up happening at this intersection is you've got a platoon of vehicles that come from the west. So you're talking about east of town, I think. Am I right? Towards Elmira? So you have a bunch of cars come when the light turns green in the eastbound direction. A bunch of cars and trucks come. Then it turns red and there's a bit of a break. Then you have the cars come southbound and turn and go. And then you get, so the only time you're getting a break created by the light is when it turns red. If we change the timing of the light to be shorter, we'll get more of those. We'll get more breaks when the light turns red. But the reality is also that as we get further and further out of town, the gaps that are created by the red light at Maine and Wallace start to disperse in the traffic flow and they become a little bit more even. And so I'm not sure how much of a difference that makes as you get out to the edges of town. That's just about traffic growing and filling in and higher traffic volumes. It's going to become more and more difficult for traffic to turn out of those businesses. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. So are you saying that it's more about volume then versus timing?
I suspect if what you're talking about are the businesses that are further towards the edge of town, I think it has more to do with the growing volume of traffic on Highway 86 than it does about the traffic light. As you get sort of 400 or 500 meters away from a traffic light, the effect of the traffic light creating gaps in traffic starts to get lost.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Kellum is next.
Yes, thank you through you, Mayor Kaysenberg, and thank you, Julia, for your report. Obviously, a very hot topic, especially for me and for everyone on council. But just I have about 10 things. I only do one at a time and one when I'm allowed to. But you know, I think a concern are left turns. We need to implement more no left turns in the downtown core. You know, and one where, and I was at the meeting was at the Wellington corner there. I don't believe there should be left turns permitted there anytime, no doubt, than on Anchorman from 7 till 10. Now, that being said, we could put a police officer there for 10 hours and would pay his salary for the year for the amount of people that turn left on that street. But I think we need to look at that. To go up one more, whether it's to Halstead or over, you can get through Main Street. That's no problem. So I think we need to take a look at some intersections in the downtown core, and again eliminate left-hand turns through certain hours. I'll start with that. Thank you.
I think that was a comment, and
Yeah.
I don't disagree with you, in particular because Wellington is so close to the Wallace intersection. It probably would make some sense to restrict left turns in the peak period. In my experience with left turn restrictions, the ones that are most closely obeyed are the ones that make sense and are self-regulated. So if there was a left turn restriction from Wellington onto Main Street, and a person tries to turn left and there's a person who wants to turn right behind them, they're laying on their horn and letting them know they don't want to wait, right? That kind of turning restriction tends to work very well. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, if I can remind council, the opportunity for us at this moment is that we have our consultant delegate here. And it's better to ask questions at this point than to express notions of how to remedy this, I think. Because I think council has more work to do here. So next is Councillor Rothwell.
Thank you, Mayor Todd. I thought Lyndon Couch was next, but if not, I'll go forward. Thanks very much for your presentation. I appreciate your work and effort of the team and their staff. My question is associated with the removal of the parking east of the Wallace intersection on the south side, the 5 spaces. And I believe in your work, we talked about the possibility of 3 spaces coming forward. And I recall at the PIC you mentioned a concern about visibility from the entrance from the home hardware coming on to out of there, coming north and onto either east or west onto Main Street. My question is to you as to whether or not the restriction should be not allowing access from the home hardware and having more on-street parking as a result, because we'd only have in traffic as opposed to in and out traffic, and it is a very tight location. So I'd like to hear your comment on that. Thank you.
Yes, the comment that I made at the Public Information Center was that part of the benefit of not having those parking spaces on the south side of Main Street, east of Wallace, is that the visibility for exiting the home hardware, the building center, is far better. You're not trying to peek your way around the cars. There's one parking space that is particularly, or was particularly close to that driveway. It's difficult to see around. So that's why we've said we didn't want to reinstate all 5 of those parking spaces. They make maneuvering a little bit tricky as well. It's partly about visibility, it's partly about maneuvering. I mean, we can look into other options. That's not an option that we've considered. Restricting that driveway to either just in, well, I think I heard you say just inbound, is what we could look at that. That's not something we've looked at yet. But just reminding that if any traffic is coming out of there, whether they're turning right or left, they need to be able to see the traffic on their left coming, and that's where the parked vehicle can block their way. So that was part of the reason we wanted to maintain at least losing that 1 parking space at the one end of the 5, and then the other end of the 5, which is closest to the Wallace Street intersection, we felt we still needed that space, or we benefit from having that space for maneuvering traffic, in particular the large trucks. But where we thought we needed all 5 of those spaces for the maneuvering, we think that we just need the first one. So we could get the middle 3 and protect the maneuvering, but then also protect the visibility from the driveway. That's where we were going with the returning 3 of the parking spaces.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Richardson next.
Thank you very much. It's very informative to actually see what the pilot is doing. One question I have is about if indeed it is decided to go forward and maintain the pilot, how does snow removal work as far as on the Wallace south section go with the bollards and everything that we have there? How does it work in that for actual snow removal and regular maintenance?
I will let Lyndon answer that question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. We've been reviewing it actually since we instated it. Our small blowers that are used for the sidewalks, as well as some snow storage capacity that's been created on the emergency lane, should accommodate most of the removal that we need to do. We do know we're going to have to keep those bollards clear. It's going to take a little bit of extra time, and it's going to be that sidewalk machine that does it. It could also result in some more snow removal, but we've reviewed it, and we're going to talk to our contractors as we move into the winter if it stays, just to how we keep it clear. But it's definitely doable. It'll be a combined effort probably with our forces and the contract truck snow removal.
Okay, thanks, Lyndon.
Councillor Andreessen, since we've gone through the list of new questions, Councillor Andreessen, second shot.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity, Mayor Kaseberg, through you. The next question I have is just around surveys. You know, it's always tricky with surveys and trying to get enough feedback. Was this a typical response rate for surveys in a municipality of this nature? And do you believe that it might be helpful to continue the survey process to get some more feedback? Thank you.
I can jump off here, Lyndon, if you'd like. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I was pleasantly surprised with the 300 survey results for the broad stakeholder survey. I think that was probably pretty good for this type of project. I think with the business owner survey, I mean, it would be nice to get more feedback. I think what may have happened is they may have already provided their feedback through the broad stakeholder survey. They had the opportunity to do that. And so this, when we started asking them very specific questions, if they didn't feel they had something to add to that, they didn't participate. So it's a bit hard to say, but I would say the broad survey together with the feedback that we received directly to staff and to other members of the municipality probably represents a pretty good cross section. Although, as I mentioned, it was a bit, skewed to the people who were most highly impacted.
Deputy Mayor Kellum's next.
Thank you, Mayor Kaysenberg, through you. And this is for Lyndon. Just Lyndon, a question: Has there been any accidents or significant scares at the four-way stop since we've implemented them that you're aware of?
Yes, I have record of one fail to stop at that intersection. I talked to the police regarding that, and that's the only one as of last week that we were aware of that had happened. It's heavily used. It seemed to be fairly clear in all directions for traffic. We had put the stop ahead signs up as well, so it's gone quite well. But there was the one accident, a fail to stop, but that's the only one that's on record.
Thank you.
Councillor Rothwell with a second question.
Thanks very much, Mayor Todd. Question for Julia. You mentioned in the survey the number of people, especially that were skewed, issues of concern from the residents in the south end that now have to find other ways. Is there anything specifically that we can do to address the concerns that they brought forward, and certainly the couple that brought the pick that brought forward their concerns, but is there anything that other directions or signage or something that's going to address the concerns that have been expressed numerous times in the surveys to help or assist members of the community of the South End to find the way to go now that we're requiring them to either go east or west to come north. Can you address that for us, please? Thank you.
Sure. I mean, it is tricky because we're taking away what was the best route from the south end of town to the north end of town. So off the top of my head, I think we could potentially provide a bit of a routing map to them that shows what some of the options are, as opposed to directing them to one particular route, which we stayed away from in the past, and I think we should continue to do. We could provide alternative routing suggestions. And then we could look at a couple of those intersections, and I'm thinking in particular of the Wellington intersection, to see if there's something we can do to make it work better.
Thank you.
Next is Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I'm just wondering, was there any data taken from the increase or decrease in traffic heading south out Wallace South to 84 and using that as an alternative route?
Yeah, we didn't count that. All we can tell you is, as I did through the presentation, how people have adjusted their travel through the main Wallace intersection. And then we know that they're going the ones that are not going through the intersection are going elsewhere, but we haven't counted down in the south end. It's an interesting question. Unfortunately, we have limited before data for that. So it would be hard to say if that has increased or not.
I see that Mr. Couch would like to make a comment.
Our project for Line 84 extended throughout the 2018, 2019, 2020 period. And because of that, those last 2 years, we weren't able to get accurate data. It's when we were trying to gather it. And because of the construction that was happening, I think it really pressured the downtown. We saw a lot more trucks in there as well because of the 84 construction. But unfortunately, during our study windows, it was under construction. And so that's why we didn't gather it. I have had, there are many comments. Much of the survey, over 100 pages of comments, do mention people going south. And in conversation with people in the south, I know they say specifically that they have started to go south for certain errands. So we know what's happening. We haven't quantified it. We'd have to study that separately and just look for new information. But the comments did come back stating it. We didn't get the information because we were under construction.
Any further questions? I think I'd like to wrap this up at this point, but entertain one or two more if anyone has any left. Okay, we're not seeing anything. Ms. Salvini, thank you very much. I personally believe that there's great merit in conducting experiments in government. It's not a usual thing that we do, but I think having an experiment or two in our community across the range of things that we do is going to be useful moving forward to understand how we improve value and become more efficient. So this is the first, I think, of recent grand experiments, and we appreciate the insight and the data collection and the interest collection, because certainly we've had a number of our constituents who have expressed interest and interests, plural, in terms of what they'd like to see happen here. So I appreciate very much all of your work. Mr. Potter, hat tip as always to you. And thank you, Lyndon, for quarterbacking a lot of this on behalf of the staff as well. I know that you've worked hard with this one and had a lot of comment turning up in your email, on your phone, etc. So thank you very much. And certainly those who are guests for this purpose, you're welcome to exit our call at this point. Council, we did not plan to take an action tonight. We planned to hear our report. And I think at this point, it's clear that the will is to do something more, make a choice about what we're going to do with the continuance of this. If I can poll you just generally, is council agreeable to staff bringing forward a report that actually brings a recommendation to this council at the next meeting? Anyone find that objectionable? Are we seeing anything, Clerk Prefelds? Sure. Councillor Andreessen, did you wish to make a comment?
Hi, thank you, Mayor Kaysenberg. I guess my question would be that would the report be more on the short-term pilot piece or on the bigger picture of long-term and short-term, recommendations and suggestions? Thanks.
I think it's fair to say at this point that we must await the arrival of the Transportation Master Plan draft to this council. My understanding is that is to come in early winter. So my gut from everything I've heard is it's going to happen in December. That will spell out to some degree long-term implications and possible projects and initiatives that could deal with transportation and traffic in a more significant and coherent way, including, I would expect, some comment on what we do about bypass for traffic around Listowel. So your question is tricky because we're waiting that report. The question is, do we reverse the experiment at this point and run through the winter until we get that report? Are these two items tightly linked? And perhaps what I'll do, maybe as a surprise here, is I'll ask CAO Snell to weigh in on this matter just briefly in terms of the linkage between the transportation master plan and this experiment that we've done. CAO Snell?
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. So I think, as the Mayor said, really the master plan will have those long-term solutions embedded in them, and also what we're required to do both legislatively and technically, as far as safety-wise, to one, acquire the necessary land, which may even require expropriation at some point. So we've got to make sure that we have all our I's dotted and our T's crossed, and that includes things like road widening for those potential truck bypasses, and then and also sort of some of the planning matters that is maybe required for laying out our road patterns. But having said that, this project or trial is sort of independent of the traffic master plan, and it is really a solution that may provide some solutions to the downtown traffic until we get those longer term decisions made. But I think, as correctly stated by Julie in her presentation, many of those are going to take time for reasons that are even beyond North Perth's control, because a lot of those intersections are not in our control. They're either controlled by the county and, or more specifically, MTO. So I know we heard a lot about roundabouts at those intersections during the budget visiting session, but those are MTO controlled intersections. And even if North Perth would like to put a roundabout there tomorrow, we still require the permission or the approval of the province.
Thank you. Councillor Barron's next, please.
Yes, through you, Mayor Kasenberg. I guess what I'm wondering is very similar to what Councillor Andreessen is wondering. There were a number of issues brought out in the presentation that need permanent fixes, whether it's the parking or the permanent stop signs on Elma or those types of things. And I was hoping that that's what the upcoming report will maybe take into account. Even though, yes, it does feed into the master transportation plan, because this is a ripple effect of everything else. And we haven't yet had a discussion. While traffic is finding its way, it seems to me that it's also causing issues at other intersections. And we haven't fully investigated that. And I'm just wondering if maybe the report could speak to doing some updated traffic counts or some issues such as the Wellington one with no left turns, that type of thing. Like I said, there were a number of issues brought forward in the report that maybe need permanent fixes to, irregardless of whether we keep the pilot or not even. But it's been suggested that that pilot program might be continued through the winter while we take a look at these other things. So I guess I'm looking more towards a report that has some of those issues that I would call the ripple effect from doing the pilot. So if that were the case, then it might be hard to pull it together in a week. But, you know, if the pilot is going to continue through the winter months, then we would have a little bit more time to spend a little bit more energy, realizing that a lot of people have spent a lot of energy on it already. It's I'm just not prepared right now to say yay or nay, let's keep it or get rid of it, because I haven't seen the other issues that were brought forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Barron. I think that makes complete sense. I'm actually completely in agreement with your thoughts there. Given that that's the premise, I think we do need to give staff a little more time and the consultants a little bit more time. What that inherently means, and I think this council has to acknowledge that either at its next meeting or tonight, if we're so inclined, is that the pilot stays for a little bit longer until we get that report and the opportunity to understand the ripple effects or the downstream impacts of the experiment. So, Council, I'm curious. We hadn't planned to do any firm business about this, but just take a report tonight. I'm curious about whether there is general consent to wait to the appropriate time in terms of our consulting team and Mr. Couch's work to bring back the report and allow the pilot to continue until that point. Is anyone significantly objecting to waiting out the necessary time so that our staff and consultants can roll this up and bring us a nice package that includes addressing all of the concerns that have been raised and how they might be remediated? Anyone object to that? In general terms, in terms of process moving forward? Fairfields, are you seeing anything? Okay, so we're sort of loosely deciding tonight that we'd like another report from Mr. Couch and the team. We hope that you've taken note of the concerns and objections that have been raised, and perhaps there are some remedies that can be brought forward that would be part of a continuing experiment or part of a permanent change, whatever you recommend. We would like to give you a little time. We acknowledge that, and so this council is, from what I can see, in favor of giving you a little bit of time to achieve that outcome. And last chance for council. Anyone object to giving this experiment a little bit more rope and so that Mr. Couch and team can catch up with remedies? I think we have consensus. I'm not seeing anyone shouting at me through chat, so that's good. Councillor Anstead, would you like to ask a question?
Thanks, Mayor Kasenberg. Through you, I just I'm fine with that in principle. I just think I want to understand what the timeline would be if we're talking about extending. What's that look like? And is that going to be in the report, or where are we getting that from? Thank you.
Sure. So I think I'm going to turn this over to Lyndon or Chris, but I think the general premise is that we need a report as soon as practical, but allowing that there are some things that you have to work out and sort through in terms of remedies. So we know that it's not going to be a week. But Mr. Couch, first thoughts on that subject? Are we a couple weeks out?
Yep, I think thank you. 2 weeks is adequate. Really, it's been a very detailed research. We've got good feedback from a lot of different groups and core business. There's some modifications we can make that we've talked about tonight. There's others that we can do specifically for some of the businesses that we've been talking to, and also at some of the intersections. So within the 2-week window, yep, we can come back with a report that'll make recommendations and mention some of the modifications that we've talked about tonight as well.
Great. Is it okay, Councillor Anstead? You're satisfied with that answer?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. All right, I think we have general sense of what we're doing now. That's great. Let's move forward. Actually, this would be a good time to take a 5-7 minute recess, I think. So, Council, if you want to come back at 8:50 p.m., that's 8 minutes according to my clock. That'll give you the opportunity for a health break, and we'll see you back in a few moments. Okay, Council, if I can invite you back to the table. Simon is somewhere in the building, and I'm trusting that he's paying attention to our need to move back to the usual settings. If there's something I need to do, Simon, let me know. Should we wait on Simon? Thank you, Council. I hope you had a refreshing brief health break. Welcome back to the table. This allows us to move on with our reports from departments and key staff under agenda item number 5. For item 5.1.1, Council is receiving a report from the Climate Change Coordinator that outlines a greenhouse gas emission reduction plan for the Municipality of North Perth. I'm going to call on our Climate Change Coordinator, I believe, first time presenting to Council, Amara Kartik, present and explain and answer any questions about this report. Welcome, Amara.
Thank you, Mayor Kassenberg, and good evening, Council. So tonight I'm going to be presenting a brief overview of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Plan. Next slide, please. So to start, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the ICLI Local Governments for Sustainability established a Partners for Climate Protection PCP program, which was signed by North Perth in 2019. The aim of the program is so that the PCP members commit to adopting a community greenhouse gas reduction target in line with the Government of Canada's target and to adopt a target that is either similar or more ambitious. Next slide, please. The PCP program is based on a 5-milestone framework that involves completing a greenhouse gas inventory and forecast, setting a greenhouse gas reduction target, developing a local action plan, implementing that plan, and monitoring and reporting the progress and results. Through the PCP platform, North Perth's community emissions were compiled and uploaded into the tool, which then assisted in calculating the total emissions from each sector. Next slide, please, Pat. So this graph shows the total community emissions for Perth County, including the City of Stratford and Township of St. Mary's. All emissions was calculated off of the baseline year of 2017. The greatest contributor to local emissions is a combination of all transportation. So this includes on-road transportation, such as personal vehicles, as well as off-road vehicles, such as tractors and other agriculturally related vehicles. This makes up approximately 54% of the total emissions. The second largest contributor in the area is the building sectors, and this makes up approximately 38% of the total emissions. So majority of these emissions come from a source of natural gas, propane, and fuel oil. And finally, the third contributor of emissions is from solid waste. Next slide, please. So specifically looking at the breakdown for North Perth, the greatest contributor, similar to the previous chart, is from the transportation sector, which accounts for approximately 64%. This is then followed by a combination of the building sectors, so that is the purple sections represented on the chart, which accounts for 31%, and finally 5% from solid waste. Next slide, please, Pat. So looking specifically at the breakdown of the greenhouse gas emissions, in 2017, North Perth emitted approximately 348,622 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And this was from on-road transportation, off-road transportation, agriculture, waste, and building sectors. So this amount of emission is equivalent to approximately 74,000 cars driven for 1 year. So with this total of emissions, if the emissions per person in 2017 was equal to approximately 26 tons of CO2, which is comparable to nearly 6 passenger vehicles driven per year per person. Next slide, please. So keeping with this growth rate and the emissions from 2017, if this scenario was to continue as is, it could reach levels up to nearing 570,000 tons of CO2 per year, which is equivalent to about 120,000 vehicles driven for 1 year. Next slide, please. So the next few slides will show the projected emissions under 3 different scenarios and controls. Just focusing on the red line, which gives us the worst possible outcome if the emissions were to continue as is establishes a rate of emissions could continue as normal today, then the projected average yearly temperature would be around 15 degrees Celsius. And what that means is with a higher heat temperature, it could have a significant health effect on our communities. Next slide, please. So this chart graph is an indication of the length and severity of wintertime. So a decrease in frost days means that the growing season, yes, would increase in the area, but it also means that there will likely be an increase in pests and the potential for vector-borne diseases. Less frost days also means that it will limit the type of plants and animals that can currently survive in this climate. So the new climate means that normal species that we see today may not be able to survive in the future climate, affecting our ecosystems and causing a decrease in our biodiversity. Next slide, please. And these 2 graphs show the projected cooling degree days and the days with a maximum temperature at 30 degrees. And this basically means it just indicates that the amount of air conditioning needed to maintain a comfortable temperature within the warmer months will increase. Increasing and cooling degrees days is indicative of a longer and more intense summer. And this is important indicator for health and environmental risk. Temperatures above 30 degrees can also increase the risk of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Next slide, please. So getting into the plan identifies various actions and strategies to move forward on increasing our adaptability and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions within the community. The approach of the greenhouse gas reduction plan is to ensure that there is both short and long-range planning in programs and initiatives to constantly build and ensure climate change is included in our future plans. This leads to the next point of mainstreaming climate into practices, plans, and decisions. And to ensure a smooth transition, it is an inclusive plan that covers the likes of key stakeholders, individuals, and the community. Next slide, please. So the plan is broken down into targets, actions, and goals, covering these 7 sectors. So to briefly go into each sector, starting with the government, municipality and county governments are also capable of effectively engaging the local community on climate change, local action, and resiliency projects. The local government can properly engage our community so that we are able to make real change and be part of decision-making within our community. This can be done by adopting a climate lens tool, such as the one provided by the Clean Air Partnership. And what this does is it helps to analyze the relationship between municipality decisions and climate change. So just being able to have that projection and understanding where our decisions in the future could lead us in relation to climate change. The second sector, building and land use. So by implementing a green building standard, not only helps to boost the local economy, but also addresses priorities that have been set through the development of this plan. This includes air quality, energy efficiency, water quality, and solid waste. Looking at business and industry, it is important that we start, join, and or support a local green business hub. And it is known by implementing sustainable actions into our businesses, it not only helps to improve the business, but it also improves our efficiency and reduces cost overall, creating a circular economy. In the transportation sector is one of the largest contributors to our local greenhouse gas emission. There is an opportunity to push the reduction of the sector of emissions through supportive actions and policies, such as developing better connectivity and promoting active transportation, and implementing a transportation master plan. In the waste sector, ultimately, the ideal solution in this scenario is to create local markets and or moving to a zero waste community and supporting transition to a circular economy. So through target and plan for waste related changes and projects into the coming years in each municipality, this plan helps to set targets for waste diversion and waste reduction, which are both crucial in reducing the waste that goes into our landfills. In the natural environment, there are many projects that could be implemented across the region to increase naturalization and sequestration opportunities. Planting and renaturalizing has many co-benefits and can often be assisted through local schools to encourage a deeper connection to the environment, as well as allowing opportunities to teach about biodiversity and land use. The naturalization of spaces is important as it allows for natural and native biodiversity and ecosystems in the community to return and thrive. And finally, looking at the agriculture sector, it is to ensure that the farming community has access to funding and resources to implement resiliency projects that reduce runoff and in turn improve local water quality. Next slide, please, Pat. So briefly, just going over the goals for each sector, starting with the government. It is to embed climate consideration into all municipalities and provide educational resources. In the building and land use, to create greener, more sustainable, accessible, and energy efficient neighborhoods. In the building and industry sector, to support sustainability and climate action in local businesses. In the transportation sector, to support and plan for future transportation needs, changes, and priorities. In the waste sector, to reduce waste going to landfill to become a zero waste community. In the natural environment, to preserve and improve our natural ecosystems and assets. And finally, the agriculture sector to support our local agricultural resiliency and mitigation projects. Next slide, please. So this plan is intended to be a support for the community to lead in climate action and also to be led by the municipalities. The implementation strategy will allow municipalities and the county to be leaders in climate action, while also allowing for a shared responsibility of the implementation. It is also important to note that this is a partnership and this can also be achieved through external organizations to help with the successful and smooth implementation of this plan. And also being able to budget and plan for climate actions, which would be more accessible through the adoption of a climate lens. There are many different avenues for government funding for green projects that are constantly being updated and renewed. And it is important that we take away the overall message that through the adoption of this plan, it will showcase how our communities are all connected and also working together to create a healthier and more prosperous future. And this can be achieved through greenhouse gas reduction plan. Thank you. And I will now be open for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kartik. I believe CAO Snell would like to make some comments as well.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening again, Council. Certainly, as you're aware, Amira has recently joined us as the Climate Change Coordinator. She had taken the work done by Rebecca, certainly became familiar with it, reviewed it, and polished it off with her own presentation. It's important to note that we're the fifth council that a mayor has presented to. My understanding is 3 of the 4 previous member municipalities have approved and adopted the plan. My understanding is that would be the township of Perth South, City of Stratford, and the town of St. Mary's. West Perth does have a couple of questions that the mayor will be bringing back to West Perth Council. So I think tonight's important to realize that this plan is really just the starting point, and it will take an implementation strategy going forward, and that will really be the nuts and bolts of how we get this plan into action, and that will certainly be the next steps as we proceed with this plan if adopted by council. So certainly, just like to thank the mayor for tonight's presentation.
Thanks, CEO Snell. Questions and first comments, Councillor Duncan.
Thank you through you, Mayor Kaysenberg, and thank you for your for the presentation, Mara. I have a question in regards to I see quite a bit of data on how much greenhouse gas we're producing. I'm just wondering why we don't see any data in our plan with how much our natural environment sequesters of the carbon we produce to give us a actual true final number of the carbon that we're trying to reduce. I think that would be a more accurate number for us to try and live by if we knew how much our natural environment actually sequestered, as opposed to just how much we produced overall. Ms.
Cardick, do you want to?
I think CAO Snell was going to answer that.
CEO Snell.
Thank you. And certainly some people refer to that as sort of the net zero formula. There's certainly been a lot of debate around the whole discussion around net zero. And certainly, I think we could, let's take the agricultural sector as an easy example of that. We all know they have crop inputs, and they probably do create a lot of carbon sequestering through their plant production. And that's all great, and it's all very positive work. Now, could we still look at ways to still reduce the emissions created through the agricultural sector? I think the answer is probably yes, certainly. But we want to make sure that we support the agricultural sector in those initiatives. And there's certainly good practices going on that really do impact that, like cover crops. And certainly cover crops have made a resounding rebound in the recent years of people using cover crops, but certainly we know that there's not used by everybody. So I think sequestering can be part of the solution, but I think anything we can do to reduce our carbon inputs, no matter what sector they're from, whether that be from the building sector or the transportation sector, can only help our environment in the long run. So we can do some work around sequestering, but I still think it's imperative that we should be trying to reduce our overall emissions to the environment.
Okay, thank you. Who's next, Pat? Councillor Rothwell is next.
Thank you, Mayor Todd. And through you, thank you, Amara, for your presentation. This is very timely, and we appreciate the work and effort that both you and Rebecca previously to you have done working within our communities to sort of gauge what's happening in our communities and with the input that was received. A couple of comments here. I think it's fantastic. One of the recommendations on the agriculture side is a clean water type project. Just for your information, and it should be known by other staff, should have shared this with you. For a number of years, the County of Perth was part of the Clean Water Project that covered the entire county as well as all of our watersheds in Perth County. for them, the Thames, the Maitland, the Asabo Bayfield, and the Grand. So I have, and certainly other councillors, Councillor Duncan had mentioned this at our budget committee last week. This is crucial for us as in our community, but all across Perth County, to get back into the understanding of what agriculture is to our county and the importance of environment in all of this. Our farmers traditionally are considered to be agricultural stewards. They need help to do the right thing, and I think it's fantastic, this proposal for a clean and watertight project, and fully in support of that. I also want to say is that there is already an agriculture working group within Perth County. It's been on for a number of years, and I think it needs to be bolstered and increased in terms of its stature and the linkages between what the agriculture working group would do as in the proposal that you have before us is very important for us to see this matter forward, both for the agriculture sector, but more globally as the environment as well. So I thank you for the report, and I will say that implementation is going to be critical as we move forward. Is there any information that we have that the Federation Committee of Municipalities is looking at further funding to help assist in implementation? Thank you.
Ms. Kartik or CEO Snell on the FCM?
Thank you, Mayor Kassenberg, through you. As of today, I have not done much further research into funding, but I know there's constantly new avenues being opened up for us. But I think it's important for me to mention as well that at the beginning of the implementation strategy, we will have to do an inventory and survey of the area and the projects to actually know since 2017 and add that towards our reduction emissions and our targets so that we have a good overall view of where needs more input and where we have more areas to work in terms of reducing emissions. So there's definitely work to gather that information first before it moves further through the different stages.
And certainly I can just add to that. Well, the initial funding envelope for this phase was extended by FCM till February of 2022. Just some municipalities got a late start to the beginning of doing their plans for various reasons, including getting staff hired, as well as we all know, COVID did impact some municipalities with their plan development. So FCM and the federal government did extend this first phase to February, and I am hopeful, but have not seen anything for sure yet, that there will be some funds available for implementation after that date. But so that'll have to be negotiated between FCM and the federal government.
Thank you both.
Thanks for that. Next is Councillor Andreessen with comment.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Kassenberg. Again, I extend my thanks to Mira and Rebecca for all their work. This is an extensive report, tremendous detail, and I truly appreciate it. When I was taking a look at the data for the municipality and for Perth County, I really noticed the impact of on-road and off-road transportation. And if you add that up, I believe on page 183 in our council package, it's about 71% if I'm reading that correctly. And that is, that is huge. That's a tremendous impact on our environment when you look at those numbers, because the other elements of what's contributing to our environmental conditions are much like minute compared to that on-road and off-road transportation. So I really appreciate, of course, the work Perth County has done with PC Connect and trying to help with transportation in amongst our community and to link other communities with us and County. But I think it really is something for us in terms of challenging us to think about what can we do around transportation, because that's the biggest piece of this. And it does put us at a disadvantage because we have to drive a lot. We have to drive, you know, for services in terms of, in some cases, medical services and family. And we don't have the same amount of access to public transportation, even though we do have PC Connect, but there's still limitations to that. So I think that's something, if anything, could be a greater focus. I don't have the answers to that, but given that the high rate of that, it's something we should really pay attention to. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Andreessen. Can I I want to get a clear definition, if I might, of what off-road transportation means in the context of your report. Could you help me with that?
So off-road transportation refers to other mechanical vehicles. So then through agriculturally based vehicles, tractors. Yeah.
Thank you. CAO Snell, I believe you have a comment to make.
The other one interesting observation, I think it's been picked up by most municipalities too, is that water and wastewater, or wastewater and sewage is showing zero. And Amara actually caught this very earlier when she joined us in this project. We all know that wastewater and sewage plants actually do have emissions. The problem is there hasn't been a lot of work done in the industry at our size of plants about what emissions they do produce. And so we didn't have that data available. Even the city of Stratford doesn't have that data. So I think there's still some work to do on our emissions, because I'm convinced that, well, we all know that the wastewater treatment plant does create both CO2 and for sure methane. So there is some work to do still in some of our emissions that aren't showing up, because I think that 0% to me is just a little misleading. But certainly Mayor and I have had this conversation leading into tonight's presentation. So just while that slide was up, I just wanted to draw that to council's attention.
Thanks, CAO Snell. Okay, thank you, Council, for your questions and comments. I have a resolution for our consideration at this point that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth approve the greenhouse gas reduction plan as presented and direct staff to prepare an implementation plan. Deputy Mayor Kellum, can I call on you to be our mover for that one?
Yes, I will make that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Johnston, would you serve as our seconder?
Yes, I would certainly second that.
Thank you very much. Any discussion or debate? We're seeing anything, Pat? Okay, let's have that vote. It's been a while since we voted. And that is carried. Thank you very much. Amara, thank you very much for your first presentation to council. We look forward to the next one.
Thank you for having me.
Next up then is item 5.1.2. Community Development Coordinator Kim Couch has brought forward a report summarizing the work and priority setting of the somewhat renovated North Perth Economic Development Advisory Committee. I'll call on Community Development Coordinator Kim Couch for a brief overview of her report. Ms. Couch, welcome.
Actually, Mayor, I'm taking this tonight as just knowing tonight was going to be a long meeting. I didn't think tonight's report required Kim.
Carry on.
However, certainly council can see that the newly revised Economic Development Committee has tried to set some priorities, and certainly went through a very vigorous priority setting exercise that did lead us to focus on 7 priority categories. And then through further discussions and policy or procedures, we've reduced that to the 4 priorities as outlined in the report. And they being youth retention and attraction, connectivity to to internet for all businesses, affordable and attainable housing, and labor attraction and retention. And the committee will be certainly looking to bring back implementation projects or recommendations to council on these 4 priority areas. And certainly, if the committee is very successful in achieving some successes, we can certainly circle back and look at the other priority categories that were not addressed at this time. But certainly happy to answer any questions council may have.
CAO Snell. Council, any questions or first comments on this matter? I think if council was paying careful attention, you'll note that those 4 priorities are quite interwoven with each other. And so they shouldn't be a deep surprise. Are we seeing any requests for comment? Or okay, so I have a resolution in council that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth receive the report entitled North Perth Economic Development Advisory Committee Priorities dated October 18th, 2021 for information. Can I call on Councillor Duncan to be our mover for that one?
I certainly will move that.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson, will you serve as our seconder?
I'll second that. Thank you.
Thanks. Any discussion or debate on this one? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you very much. Next up would be item 5.2, reports from the clerk's department, but nothing is indicated tonight. I know they're busy at work. I know there's change afoot. All things to talk about in the near future, I suspect. All right, that allows us to turn to item 5.3, reports from the programs department. I don't believe we have any. Oh, yes, we have a report. Oh, my editing is really bad. For our only item for this department, item 5.3.1, council is presented with information about the need to raise the fees charged for services and programs associated with the child and family center portfolio. Comparison against the neighborhood and a proposed new rate schedule is included. Cost recovery is intended. I'm going to ask North Perth Manager of Programs, Amy Gangle, to give us a brief overview of this item. Ms. Gangle, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Kaysenberg, members of council. I think you did a pretty good job with presenting that. I've provided some information to assist council with the decision, including our licensing capacity as well as a fee comparison chart. Of note, we have not increased our fees since January 2020. And just some other schedules to make note of. We are reintroducing our prepayment policy. We put it on hold over the past year or so, and we are reintroducing it effective January 2022. And we have been notifying families of that since August, so giving them lots of time to be aware of that, but also being conscious of our families and finances. We, as staff, were suggesting the start date for these new rates be effective May 1st of 2022 for council's consideration. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gangle. Councillors who can participate in this one, any questions or first comments? All right, we're not seeing any at this point, Clerk Berfelds. Okay, so I have 2 resolutions here, Council. One is a bylaw, one is a standard resolution. Let's go with the standard first here, that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth approve the 2022, I'll get it right, yeah, North Perth Child and Family Center rates effective May 1st, 2022. Can I call on Councillor Rothwell to be our mover for that?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you. Councillor Seiler, will you serve as our seconder?
Yes, I'll second that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any discussion or debate? Councillor Rothwell, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor Todd, and thanks, Amy, for the report. I just, in looking at the chart on page 2 of your report, clearly, like the municipalities that are listed here, they're all over. Like there's no like there's a fairly significant range within the ones that we have listed. So clearly either their costs of operations are significantly different than ours or whatever it is. But I think just my view of the numbers, we're certainly not at the top of the pack and neither are we at the bottom. But I think it seems to be more or less on the mid to lower end. So I'm certainly in support of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rothwell. Anyone else, Clerk Bergfelds? All right, so we need to have a vote on that, right? Let's have that vote. And I think that's carried. That's all we got. Exactly. All right. Thank you. That's carried. Similarly, we have the bylaw, which actually it's an amendment to our fees bylaw. So let me read that one. That bylaw number 108-2021 being a bylaw to amend Schedule L of the North Perth Rates and Fees bylaw, be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed. Said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Councillor Andreessen, can I call on you to be our mover for this one?
Yes, I'll make that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan, will you serve as our seconder?
I will second that.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate on the bylaw? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried as well. Thank you, Council, for that. Thank you, Ms. Gangle, for drawing that to our attention. And for your report. Next then is item 5.4. That's reports from our facilities department. And for our only item here, 5.4.1, Council is invited to commit a portion of the Robert Mathers Park in Trowbridge to a memorial purpose with intended naturalization in a certain zone in the park. I'm going to ask North Perth Manager of Facilities Jeff Newell to comment on the report and its recommendations. Welcome, Mr. Newell.
Good evening, Mayor Kaysenberg and members of council.
Well, we're having a hard time hearing you, Jeff. Something about your microphone.
I'm wondering if that helps. Does that help?
Not a lot.
How about if I try that? Does that work?
As long as you lean forward, we can hear you all right. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I'll have to zoom in then. Here we go. The report that we have I've prepared here is based on a recommendation from some of our facility staff that have been approached by members of the Trowbridge community looking to establish a memorial park opportunity for them to make donations of trees. We're very fortunate in North Perth to have a number of memorial areas and community that definitely supports that opportunity to give back to the community. One of the recent developments is down in Moncton at our naturalization park there. That is just a couple of years in now, and it's a memorial area versus a memorial tree. So people can contribute financially to the memorial park, and there's really no cap as far as when we've extended the amount of space available for people to plant trees. So it is a naturalization area that kind of, interestingly enough, it speaks to some of the points that Amara made, where they contributed in the past with or they've collaborated with a conservation authority to plant trees. It certainly is something that we've had experience with in the past in Moncton, and we would like to continue this in Trowbridge. It's an 8-acre piece of property to the northeast of the baseball diamond. It's typically unmaintained at this point, but we would look at including things like trees as well as natural wildflower gardens and create a series of naturalized trails through that area. We feel it's an efficient way to create an opportunity for families, and it's also nice from a environmental standpoint to create a naturalization area. The recommendation is that Council of the Municipality of North Perth designate the area north and east of the ballpark at Robert Mathers Park as a memorial naturalized park area.
Thank you, Mr. Newell. We managed to hear that mostly. All right, let's turn to questions or first comments. Councillor Duncan first, please.
I just want to say I think this is a great idea and a great step towards the naturalization of our community. And I'm fully in support.
Thanks, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Seiler, I think, is next.
Thank you, Mayor Todd. My question, Jeff, is we have a cemetery out there, the Trowbridge Cemetery. It's out in that part of the area. I know it took us a long time to find it and what have you, because it did one time. There was a farmer that was operating over top of it, and we did find it and whatnot. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I am, Councillor Seiler. There is a cemetery there. However, it is on private property and not included in this 8-acre parcel of land that's identified in the drawing.
That's perfect. I just didn't know that if you're aware of that, but I know that our cemetery committee, we're trying to protect that area. So anyhow,
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Newell. I have a quick question. This regards the gazebo build or structure build at the Robert Mathers Park. I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but can you give me any update on that?
Yes, so there was at one point a structure in Robert Mathers Park, like a pavilion, that needs to be replaced. It's down now. We are going to be building a gazebo in that location. We were waiting for the price of lumber to drop a little bit to make it more cost effective, but the plan is to build that during this fall prior to the end of the year.
Oh, that's very good news. Thank you. Any other questions that we're seeing? Okay, so Council, I have a resolution for our consideration that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth designate the area north and east of the ballpark at Robert Mathers Park as a memorial naturalized park area. Councillor Anstett, can I call on you to be our mover?
Yes, I would move that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Behrens, will you be our seconder?
I would love to second that motion. Thank you.
Thanks. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote.
I'm in favor. My vote didn't show up. Thank you.
And that is carried. Thanks, Councillor Anstett. So let's move forward then. Item now reports from finance as item 5.5. As item 5.5.1, finance staff has brought forward for council review the accounts as of this day, October 18th, 2021. I'll note that some councillors have declared a potential pecuniary interest in this item and will absent themselves from consideration and voting. Are there any questions from the remaining councillors on this report? Seeing none, I have a resolution for our consideration that reads as follows. The following summary of accounts be received by council for information. The total is $4,664,553.54. Can I call on, let's see where I am here. Councillor Johnston, will you serve as our mover?
Yes, I would move that.
Thank you. And Councillor Richardson, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I'll second that. Thank you.
Thanks. Any discussion or debate on this one? Let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. That moves us along to our item 5.6, the Environmental Services Department. No report here this evening. They are on duty, as always, taking care of essential services for our community, and we thank them for that. Let's turn to item 5.7, reports from our manager of operations. And we have one report here tonight from that department. 5.7.1 invites council to amend a previous bylaw with some additional information updates regarding winter maintenance routes to be cared for during the upcoming winter. I'm going to invite Mr. Couch, our manager of operations, to make any comments he believes will support this item. Mr. Couch.
Thank you, Mayor Kastenberg. This is a housekeeping item. The addition of these sidewalks, which are highlighted in the mapping in a bold yellow, outline the distance that we are proposing for this upcoming winter season for our sidewalk plowing routes. I've included in the report an outline of the provincial regulations as to what level of service is guided by the province in terms of sidewalk plowing. We typically exceed that. The two colors of red and it's an orange show primary and secondary routes. The primaries are predominant. They're usually done day of and hopefully morning of, and then secondaries are followed. So the bullet list at the bottom of the map that Pat is providing for you just shows the highlighted yellow sections. And what we're proposing is we use our two sidewalk plows that cover Listowel right now. The other is trailered to Atwood and Moncton. Those two machines would add the highlighted bold routes. And this is the policy behind these additional changes. You will see that these try and join new subdivisions and other residential areas with spurs or connecting sidewalks for winter pedestrians. We have fairly good coverage. 60% of the walkways are done in Listowel. This will take us a little over 60% and probably around the 35-kilometer serviced mark. So that's for the consideration of council to add these to our winter service program for the upcoming season.
Thanks, Mr. Couch. Any first comments or questions on this, Pat? Councillor Rothwell?
Thanks, Mayor Todd, and thanks, Lyndon, for your report. The question I have is regarding the mapping, and we only show winter maintenance in the Listowel ward. Is there a separate one for Atwood and Moncton, or how do we deal with those?
There is. We did add, there's been a series of additions actually. We added in Atwood last year to the mapping, and they're on different schedules in the bylaw. This year, we're only making changes or proposing them in Listowel.
Oh, okay, thank you. My further follow-up is this question is in our subdivisions with our residential streets, sidewalks are on one side. Are we not clearing any of those sidewalks within the subdivisions, or do we expect children, for example, or pedestrians to walk on the road during the winter to get to the primary or secondary routes before they get onto a sidewalk?
We'd have to look at it subdivision by subdivision. Some of the phases in the subdivisions aren't assumed yet, so you don't see coverage, let's say, on an Adams Avenue in Hannes Haven, and you wouldn't see coverage in Forbes Crescent, let's say, down in H&J subdivision. So it's case by case. Assumption is a factor here as well.
Just further, I think that's an important point. Are the subdividers not required to maintain sidewalks, or is it only roads that they're required for? Thank you.
Under the subdivision agreement, the roadways and winter operations are the responsibility of the developer. Sidewalks aren't specifically mentioned. It just says winter control measures. We can't provide those. We only provide road works and road maintenance if asked, and we charge for that.
Okay, thank you. Do we have Councillor Silers next?
Thank you, Mayor Todd. Linda, just one question. I know I've had last year a couple of inquiries just on Main Street there, and I'm trying to think. It's where Cleland's Texaco was, that corner from Main halfway through that block. There's a church in behind there, and I know we snow blow from increment halfway through that block, but the other half we don't do. And I know there was a property owner that did the maintaining themselves, would it be possible for us to come off Main and go straight through that block with it's just a half a block in there to accommodate the people there, because there is a lot of high school kids that walk that street and what have you. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to point out to you.
Maybe someone knows the geography of where Claylands is. Are we talking on Victoria?
No, it's just up. You know, there's Davison. When you're leaving town, Davison, and it'll be the next street on your left hand side. Before
has the concrete blocks around it, right in the corner of Halstead and Maine.
Halstead.
Okay.
Yeah, Halstead Street. There's a section there halfway through. It was the late John Gross that always asked me, you know, why we couldn't just maintain that half a block so that they can, instead of walking on the street and then getting back on the sidewalk portion. I'm not sure if you're aware of that or not, but I know.
Yes, we are. There are some gaps still, as we said. Some of the spines are done, and we'll have to look at that and bring back an amendment to the bylaw, perhaps for additional streets in that area. We're trying to convey the traffic on every other block, and then on the main arteries. We looked at Inkerman and continuation along there. Right now, with the 4 additional kilometers, we're expecting we can do it day of. We may go into a second day or have to just start repeating the red routes because we've got over 15 kilometers per route. So we're at a little bit of a limit in terms of, you know, what we're doing, but we can certainly look at additions for even this winter, but it would mean coming back with a bylaw and amending those as well. I'd have to talk to our operational staff too, to just see how we could route in and make those changes on those blocks as well. But for the purposes of this evening, it would include the ones that we've shown, which are actually our largest increase we've had.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn. But it doesn't have to be a high profile. You know, just whenever you get all your other sidewalks done. I know there's some ones you follow up with and whatnot. It would be just fine. There's just to fill that gap in. Thank you.
Yep, very good. I'll confirm that and talk to the operators. Thanks.
Thank you. CAO Snell.
So sort of just following up on the question by Councillor Rothwell and Councillor Seiler. We certainly have made great strides over the last number of years, but we still have a large number of sidewalk, both in newer subdivisions and the older parts of the community that do not get winter maintenance. I think Lyndon's team has made tremendous efforts to increase the amount of sidewalks being maintained, but we still just want to make sure everybody's aware that we still have large areas of sidewalk that do not get any winter maintenance. And it would require significant budget increase to and more staff resources to plow every sidewalk in the municipality.
Thanks, CAO Snell. Council, I have 2 items of business, two sort of resolutions to deal with here. So let's take them up off the table at this point. The first for consideration, a resolution that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth approve the increase in sidewalks serviced and amend winter maintenance policy bylaw 153-2017 to include these walkways. Can I call on Councillor Rothwell to be our mover for that one?
Yes, I so move.
Thank you. And Councillor Seiler, will you be our seconder?
I will second that. Thank you.
Thanks. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. Missing someone.
That would be me. My vote did not come up. I'm in. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kellum. So with that, that's carried. Now we have the bylaw, the amendment to the existing bylaw. So this is bylaw number 109-2021, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 153-2007, being a bylaw to provide winter maintenance guidelines, be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed. And the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Councillor Andreessen, can I call on you to be our mover for that?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Anstett, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I would second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote.
Again, I'm in favor. My vote did not come up. I will reboot.
That's-
Thank you.
Thanks. So that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Couch, for the report. We have no report from the fire department for this meeting, which brings us to agenda item number 6. For item 6.1, councillors, are there any reports you would like to ask of staff or of our committees? The usual approach to asking for the floor through chat function is available to you. Are we seeing anything, Clerk Bertholz? We're not. Thank you. For item 7, we have received no additional items of correspondence which require any action or recognition. That brings us to item 8 on our agenda, which allows council to consider bylaws. We have no additional bylaws for consideration this evening, except the confirmatory at the end. We're now at item 9 on our agenda. Are there any councillors wishing leave to give notice of motion? We're not seeing anything there. So that brings us to item 10 on our agenda. For item 10.1, are there any announcements that would be of benefit to our community or that reflect well on North Perth at this time? If you'd like to speak, the usual process, please. Okay, Ms. Gangle.
Thank you. Just wanted to share with council that October 21st is Childcare Worker and Early Childhood Educator Appreciation Day. So please extend great thank yous to all of our hard workers. If everybody will indulge in a small poem, I would like to read that in appreciation of our staff. You see their smiles, you wipe their tears, you are the one that's always near. You hold their hands, you see them grow, they learn so much from you, you know. That you keep them safe while they explore, you are the one that they adore. You know they need the time to play, you keep them busy every day. So here's a great big thanks to you for all the amazing things you do.
Thank you, Ms. Gangle. And there's a couple of smiles in the council chamber of appreciation for your reading that into the record. Indeed, a hat tip to all of our early childhood education folks working with us and living in our community and working elsewhere in some cases. But we certainly appreciate the work that you do. Clerk Bertholz, who's next? Councillor Behrens is next.
I have no comment. I just commend Amy for bringing it to our attention and certainly extend appreciation to all of those that are important in the life of a child.
Thank you very much. Voice here. Thank you, Council. I'm sure there might be just a little bit of collegial interest. The wedding went well. We enjoyed our visit to Montreal last weekend and seeing my son marry his now wife. It was a wonderful occasion. Now, that brings us to agenda item number 11. We have no matters for consideration in a closed session of council tonight, which means for item 12, we have nothing to report back to the community. Before we hit the confirmatory, the clerk has asked me as a request from the manager of human resources for council to establish an extra special meeting in its calendar for between now and the end of the year to deal with some human resource strategy matters that the Human Resources Committee has been addressing. The proposed dates, these are the dates that our consultant is available, and that's why we're kind of narrow in terms of the dates that are proposed are Wednesday evenings, November 10th or November 17th. The clerk would like me to sort of take a quick poll about the availability. So if I'm going to go through the names, and if you could just say the 10th, the 17th, or both, that would be very helpful to us in rapidly zoning in on what's available. Of course, you may also find that you're not available for neither. So maybe it's 10th, 17th, both or neither. How's that? Let's maybe start with the list here. Leanne, Councillor Andreessen, where you sit?
Yes, at this point, both are fine. Thank you.
Both. Okay, thank you. Councillor Anstedt.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Kasenberg. I'm just checking my calendar here. As of right now, the 10th would be the one that I would be able to attend. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Behrens.
The 10th, please.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Duncan.
The 10th for me as well.
Okay, this is becoming very clear. Deputy Mayor Kellum.
Okay, I have Perth Museum the 17th, so the 10th will work for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston, is the 10th okay for you?
Either's fine. Yep.
Okay, Councillor Richardson.
Either's okay with me.
Okay, Councillor Rothwell.
Either's fine, thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Seiler.
Either's fine.
Okay, so it looks like it's going to be the 10th. That would be the solution. That's going to be fine for me as well. So looks like it will be a busy week. All right. Thank you, Council, for indulging myself and the clerk in exercise. Council, as a mandated good practice, acts near the end of its meeting agenda to confirm all of its actions and its business conducted through what's called the confirmatory bylaw. I have a draft of our confirmatory bylaw for this meeting, and I'll read that into the record that bylaw number 110-2021, being a bylaw to confirm generally previous actions of the Council of the Municipality of North Perth, be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed. And said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Now I have to choose carefully here. Councillor Duncan, will you serve as our mover for this one?
I will move that.
Thank you. And Councillor Johnston, will you be our seconder?
I can second that.
Very good. Any discussion or debate on that? I'm actually looking forward to the night when there's discussion or debate on the confirmatory bylaw. That ought to be really interesting. Okay, let's have that vote. And that is carried. The clerk tells me it might not be as interesting as I think it would be, just so the council is aware of what's going on in the chatter in the council room. All right, that brings us to the adjournment point. Councillors, we have completed a deliberation and taken action on the business that came before us tonight. I have a motion to adjourn, which reads as follows. The council meeting adjourns at 9:53 p.m. to meet again for general council business on Monday, October 25th, 2021 at 7 p.m. So we do have a meeting next week, council. Let me see if I can call on Councillor Behrens to be our mover for that.
Yes, I will move that motion.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor Kellum, will you serve as our seconder?
Yes, I will second that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. As we know, that's not debatable, so let's have that vote. This is the perfect time for my e-scribe to die, which it just did.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Rothwell, I'm in favor.
Thank you, Councillor Rothwell, and you can add me to the list of being in favor as well. And with that, that is carried unanimously. Council, we will meet again next Monday night, the 25th, same back channel. We're getting close to Halloween, so let's play that up perhaps. And otherwise, this meeting is adjourned for a good meeting. Good night.